In ancient times, when Egyptian civilization was at its height and Egypt was seen as a great center of learning, there existed a secret body of sacred teachings known as the mysteries. These teachings were not shared with the public. They were guarded by the pharaohs and high priests, and taught only within the mystery schools. Admission was limited. Only those considered worthy and qualified were allowed to enter and learn. Through the centuries, these teachings were preserved and passed on by prophets and philosopher sages. Figures such as Hermes Trismegistus, remembered as one of the great transmitters of hidden wisdom. The rule was consistent. The mysteries were taught only to those who were judged ready and capable of understanding the philosophical, metaphysical, and scientific ideas contained within them. Over time, the teachings are said to have reached many rulers, thinkers, and men of science. By studying and applying them carefully, these individuals were able to live extraordinary lives and achieve remarkable results in their own fields. Meanwhile, the masses remain largely unaware that such secret teachings even existed. And today, we acknowledge the guardians and preservers of this tradition, because their work is the reason we can now learn these teachings, practice them, and share them responsibly for the good of humanity. The Hermetic Philosophy. Some teachings are so old and so quietly influential that entire civilizations echo their ideas without ever admitting where they came from. Not a religion, not a self-help trend, a hidden method. A method that does not beg to be believed. It waits to be understood, and it begins with a warning, the kind that tells you this is not meant for casual eyes. The lips of wisdom are closed, except to the ears of understanding. The Kybalion. Welcome back, Seeker. Tonight, we enter the Hermetic Philosophy, a current of hidden doctrines said to have flowed out of ancient Egypt into the bloodstream of the world. A philosophy that insists it is not merely something you study, but something that studies you back. It measures your readiness, your patience, your capacity to hold a truth without turning it into ego. This is not a tour of trivia. This is a guided initiation into an idea that has survived by doing one thing exceptionally well, staying just out of reach of the unprepared. Origins. Hermetic tradition begins in Egypt, not as a footnote, but as a foundation. From old Egypt, it teaches, came the fundamental esoteric and occult instructions that shaped the philosophies of races, nations, and peoples for several thousand years. Egypt, the home of the pyramids and the Sphinx, is presented as the birthplace of hidden wisdom and mystic teaching. This is not said as a metaphor, it is said as lineage. Egypt is called the land of Isis, a land whose temples did not simply perform rituals. They preserved doctrine. They held knowledge like a sealed vessel. And from this secret doctrine, the tradition says, other nations borrowed freely. India, Persia, Chaldea, Media, China, Japan, Assyria, ancient Greece, and Rome. The names are not random. They are a map of influence. The image Hermetic teaching gives you is almost ceremonial, a feast of knowledge offered by the hierophants and masters of Egypt to those who arrived ready to partake. Not everyone was invited. Not everyone could digest it. The condition was preparation. This is the first lesson hidden in the story of origin. Hermetic wisdom is not described as information for all. It is described as a sacred substance. It nourishes the prepared. It confuses the careless. It burns the arrogant. So the ancient temples, as the tradition describes them, were thresholds. At the doors of those temples entered neophytes, not tourists, candidates. They came to be changed, and afterward, as hierophants, adepts, and masters, they traveled outward to the four corners of the earth, carrying what they had received and passing it only to those who were ready to receive it as well. This is how Hermeticism claims it spread, not by conquest, not by mass conversion, by transmission, master to student, initiate to neophyte, lip to ear, not just information, but initiation. Not just ideas, but a way of holding ideas, concealing them, protecting them, and revealing them only at the right moment. If you have ever wondered why hidden traditions survive when open traditions collapse, this is the reason. Hermetic teaching does not rely on mass acceptance. It relies on continuity, a chain. And in the Hermetic telling, Egypt held the strongest chain of all. The tradition calls it the Great Lodge of Lodges of the Mystics, a center, a source, a place where the inner meanings were guarded behind the outer rituals. At the doors of her temples entered neophytes who would later become the teachers of other lands. And the tradition insists that in ancient Egypt lived adepts and masters whose stature has rarely been equaled since. Egypt is described as having held a living concentration of initiatory intelligence, a kind of apex where methods were refined, symbols were sharpened, and the inner sciences were guarded. Then the tradition narrows its focus. Among these great masters of ancient Egypt, it says, there lived one whom masters hailed as the Master of Masters, a figure so central that his name became a synonym for wisdom itself. And this is where the story becomes personal, because this is where Hermeticism introduces its teacher. The rise, the Master of Masters. His name is spoken as if it is a title and a key at the same time, Hermes Trismegistus. The tradition calls him the father of occult wisdom, the founder of astrology, the discoverer of alchemy. The details of his life story are described as lost to time. The years are too many. The records are too broken. Even in antiquity, the exact origin was disputed, with several ancient countries arguing for the honor of his birthplace. In Hermetic tradition, this kind of uncertainty does not weaken a figure, it intensifies him. Because a teacher becomes larger when the story turns into myth. Myth is not always false. Myth is often the container used when a truth is too big to fit in plain biography. Hermes is placed in the earliest days. The tradition fixes his last incarnation in Egypt at the beginning of the oldest dynasties, long before the days of Moses. The exact date is not given as a neat line in a timeline. It is given as a signal. This teaching is older than the world you think began with your familiar histories. The tradition goes further. It says many authorities regarded Hermes as a contemporary of Abraham. Some Jewish traditions even claim that Abraham received a portion of his mystic knowledge from Hermes himself. Then comes another detail that tells you what kind of figure this is meant to be. The tradition says Hermes lived 300 years in the flesh, not as a medical claim, but as a statement of stature. In the mythic language of initiation, long life signals mastery, completion, and the slow accumulation of wisdom across generations. After his passing from the plane of life, the tradition says, the Egyptians deified Hermes and made him a god under the name Thoth. Later, the people of ancient Greece also honored him as a god, calling him Hermes, the god of wisdom. This is not presented as confusion, it is presented as continuity. One current translated through different tongues, one intelligence wearing different names. The Egyptians revered his memory for many centuries, tens of centuries, calling him the scribe of the gods, and bestowing upon him his distinctive title, Trismegistus, thrice-great, great-great, the greatest great. A title that does something subtle. It tells the student that this is not merely a wise man, this is a pinnacle, a standard, a source. In all ancient lands, the name Hermes Trismegistus was revered. His name became synonymous with the fount of wisdom. And his influence did not survive only in temples or old manuscripts. It survived in language itself. Even today we use the term hermetic to mean secret, sealed, closed so nothing can escape. This is not accidental. Hermeticism teaches secrecy not as a personality trait, but as a protective law. The followers of Hermes, it says, observed the principle of secrecy in their teachings. They did not believe in casting pearls before swine. They held to a rule that appears again and again in initiatory traditions. Give milk to babes, give meat to strong men. Meaning, do not overload the unprepared with what they cannot yet handle. Do not hand a weapon to someone who thinks it is a toy. Do not offer a depth that will be turned into performance. Hermeticism is careful with truth because it treats truth as power, and power given at the wrong time creates chaos. So, the policy of careful dissemination, the tradition says, has always characterized the Hermetics, even into the present day. Now, the teaching reveals a paradox. Hermetic teachings are said to be found in all lands, among all religions, but never claimed by any one country or bound to any single religious sect. Why? Because the ancient teachers warned against allowing the secret doctrine to crystallize into a creed. A creed hardens. It becomes identity. It becomes a badge. It becomes a tool of politics. A living doctrine does not want to be worn like a uniform. It wants to function like a key. The tradition says the wisdom of this caution is obvious to students of history. It then gives examples, not as a debate, but as a warning pattern. In the Hermetic view, the ancient occultism of India and Persia was weakened when teachers became priests and mixed theology with philosophy. The result was a gradual burial of inner teaching under superstition, cults, creeds, and multiplying gods. So it was, the tradition says, with ancient Greece and Rome, so it was with the Hermetic teachings carried among Gnostics and early Christians, which were later smothered under the weight of theology when empire took hold and philosophy was forced into silence. And the student is meant to learn the mechanism behind the examples. When a secret doctrine becomes public institution, it becomes vulnerable. When it becomes vulnerable, it either hardens into dogma or it disappears. Hermeticism chooses a third way. It vanishes from the public eye while staying alive underneath, which is why the tradition emphasizes what comes next. The hidden truth, why secrets survive. Even when eras changed, even when the outer world became hostile, the tradition says there were always a few faithful souls who kept the flame alive. They tended it carefully. They did not let it go out. They did not try to turn it into a mass movement. They preserved it as a current. Thanks to these staunch hearts and fearless minds, the tradition says the truth still exists. But you will not find it openly displayed in books to any great extent. It has been passed from master to student, from initiate to hierophant, from lip to ear. This is not a romantic detail. It is the core of the Hermetic delivery system. Hermeticism does not rely on printing presses. It relies on continuity of mind. And when it was written down, the tradition says its meaning was veiled in the language of alchemy and astrology, not because the writers wanted to be confusing, because veils keep teachings safe. Veils also keep teachings intact. A veil prevents the unprepared from misunderstanding and the hostile from destroying. A veil forces the student to develop the key. That key is understanding. The tradition says this veil was necessary because of persecution, especially in the Middle Ages, when theologians fought the secret doctrine with violence. That era made secrecy not only spiritual discipline, but survival. So, Hermetic writing learned to speak in symbols. Alchemy could look like metallurgy and still hold inner meanings. Astrology could look like superstition and still hide a map of correspondences. What appears simple to the outsider becomes precise to the initiated. And because of this, the tradition says, there are few reliable books on the Hermetic philosophy even now, though countless references appear scattered across writings on occultism. Then the teaching makes one of its most decisive statements. The Hermetic philosophy is the master key that opens the doors of the occult teachings. This is not meant to sound like a marketing line. It is meant as an initiatory claim. A master key is not one more belief among many. It is the mechanism that shows you how many systems speak the same hidden language. In other words, Hermeticism does not only offer content, it offers a structure of interpretation. It teaches you how to read. And once you can read, doors that used to look like walls begin to open. Now the tradition introduces a name that carries weight precisely because it is spoken as if it were passed hand to hand in darkness. The Kybalion. The Kybalion and the art of mental alchemy. The tradition says that in the early days there was a compilation of certain basic Hermetic doctrines passed from teacher to student. It was known as the Kybalion. The exact meaning of the word itself was lost for centuries, yet the teaching remained. That detail is important. When a term survives longer than its dictionary definition, it becomes a vessel, a label for a current, a marker that says, this belongs to the chain. The tradition says these teachings have been known to many to whom they descended, mouth to ear, through the centuries, not shouted, not displayed, transmitted. The precepts were not written down in a way outsiders could simply pick up and understand. The Kybalion was described as a collection of maxims, axioms, and precepts that would sound opaque to the uninitiated, yet become clear when explained and exemplified by Hermetic initiates to their neophytes. Notice that word again. Exemplified. Hermeticism is not satisfied with theory. It demands demonstration. And this is where the tradition reveals the hidden center of its alchemy. It says these teachings constituted the basic principles of the art of Hermetic alchemy, which is commonly misunderstood. Most people hear alchemy and imagine furnaces and laboratories, base metals and gold. Hermetic teaching points deeper. It says the real work is mastery of mental forces rather than manipulation of material elements. The transmutation is not primarily one metal into another. It is one kind of mental vibration into another, one state of mind into a higher state, one pattern of consciousness into a refined pattern. This is the turning point. This is the revelation that changes the student's relationship with every symbol that came before it. Because once you understand this, the old legends are no longer childish stories. They become coded instruction. The philosopher's stone that turns base metal into gold becomes an allegory for inner transformation. Base becomes refined, heavy becomes light, blind becomes seeing. And gold, in this teaching, is not only a substance, it is a state of being that has been purified, strengthened, and made stable. This is why Hermeticism survives, because it does not depend on the outer world to cooperate. It works inward. You could lose your country, your library, your temple, your era. If the method is inside the mind, the tradition can survive anywhere a mind survives. Now the teaching turns directly toward the student, not as entertainment, as invitation. In the words carried by the tradition, the student is asked to examine the Hermetic teachings as preserved in the Kybalion and to receive explanation that makes veiled principles usable to the modern mind. Here is a clean way to understand that invitation. This is your first lesson. The Kybalion lays down the principles as condensed axioms. The path then expands those axioms into living understanding through example, reflection, and practice. What looks like a riddle becomes a tool once you have the key. The tradition speaks with humility while holding to lineage. It says the teachers are still students at the feet of Hermes, the master. The point is not to replace Hermes. The point is to continue the chain faithfully and to render the maxims understandable without stripping them of their depth. And then the tradition offers a promise that sounds simple until you realize it rearranges how you interpret timing, coincidence, and your own life. Here are two short lines at places like seals on the door. Where fall the footsteps of the master, the ears of those ready for his teaching open wide. The Kybalion. When the ears of the student are ready to hear, then cometh the lips to fill them with wisdom. The Kybalion. Hermeticism teaches that readiness is not only an inner feeling, it is a magnet. When the student is prepared, the teaching appears. When the mind reaches a certain stage, the next lesson arrives. This is described as law. Cause and effect, a principle so quiet you can miss it. Hermeticism does not tell you the world is random and you must endure it. It tells you the world is patterned and you must learn to read it. In its language, the law of attraction is not a trend. It is a branch of cause and effect. The way like draws like, the way inner condition shapes outer experience, the way the right student is brought into contact with the right teacher at the right time. The meeting is not framed as book and pupil. It is framed correctly as Hermeticism frames all transmission. Teacher and student, master and initiate, lips and ear. And at the end of the opening lesson, the tradition closes with a phrase used as a formal seal. So mote it be. What you're not supposed to know. If you listen carefully, Hermeticism has been teaching you two things at once the entire time. First, it gives you a lineage. Egypt, temples, masters, Hermes, Trismegistus, secrecy, transmission. Second, it gives you a rule for how truth moves. Truth does not announce itself to everyone. It gathers those who can carry it. It waits for readiness. And once readiness is present, the next step appears. Not because the universe is trying to impress you, because cause and effect is always operating, whether you notice it or not. This is why Hermetic teaching insists that wisdom is not for the loudest voice. It is for the ear trained to hear. It does not flatter you by saying you are special. It challenges you by implying readiness must be earned. So, here is the closing question to take with you, clean and direct. If Hermetic law draws master and student together, then what have you ignored in your life that was actually an invitation, simply because you were not ready to recognize it? Until your next step, walk the path with wisdom.